What is going on? Welcome back to the stream. Boy, has it been a minute. Your boy Phoenix is back. And it's a long story. Boy, oh boy. So, first things first, I'm going to be doing more of these videos, get kind of situated, if you will. I'll leave it at that. But I guess the gist of it is that I'm trying to see if the stream's coming in okay. The gist of it is that we have a very interesting space right now within crypto, EOS, Bitcoin. Been checking out a lot of Michael Saylor's videos. Shout out to all the homies who are also doing the same. But I figured for those folks that don't have as much time to do this, we might just cover some of those topics with you guys, and also discuss my musings with EOS and some of the latest happenings within that space. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay. You can let me know if the audio is coming in all right. That'd be great. It's my first real time using the YouTube Studio Live. I have in the past used OBS, but that seemed to give me a lot of problems in the past. So I'm hoping that this is a more crystal stream and you're able to hear me loud and clear. So obviously we've seen a decline in the overall crypto markets as of late. We had a run up to, well, that's awesome. Thank you, Cryptophasia. And shout out to you for tuning in. And for those that are tuning in, hit the like button. We've had declines going back to the peak of about a little over 60,000 for Bitcoin. And now we're looking like we may even test down to 40,000. And so, some folks might wonder why on a channel like this, we talk about Bitcoin, even though we also focus on projects like EOS. And the fact of the matter is, Bitcoin is, it carries significant weight in the market, and other projects tend to move with it. So if you're seeing Bitcoin reach some type of upward resistance, if it starts to decline, naturally, even if projects are making progress in terms of technical feats, you're going to see declines in the price of those assets, such as EOS. So that's just something to keep in mind. Do I think we'll stay there? I mean, me personally, and you guys have known this for a long time, if you've covered my channel for any short period of time, you've been around with me for years now on this journey. And we've seen over the past couple years that China, for example, has come out and announced bans on Bitcoin and other crypto assets. So this recent decline we did witness is no different, in my opinion. I mean, that's my own opinion. It's not necessarily investment advice, but we've seen this time and time again now for years, and we're going way back because I've been around the space for a long time. And again, not surprising to me. It is interesting that while China has banned Bitcoin as for their citizens and mining activity, China does still have a good percentage. They're actually one of the top holders of Bitcoin. So it is interesting that while they're making announcements to ban these types of activities in China for their own citizens, as a government, they actually hold a significant amount of BTC. And also something to keep in mind and observe, and just use your head a little bit is, even though China has banned crypto, right, in the country for the most part, or that's what the news is saying to scare people off, we do see at the same time that China institutes are still publishing rankings on projects. And EOS actually has, for as long as I can remember, these publications being out, or since EOS's inception, EOS has always been ranked as the top dog in terms of the projects, in terms of its innovation and technical prowess. So I think we're seeing two different narratives. One narrative that China wants maybe the world to see, or maybe folks that own these publications want people to think. And we're seeing, I think, different activities within maybe more influential folks all around the world, China being no different than that in terms of their holdings and in terms of other types of initiatives they have going on. So I would take whatever news you hear about bans with a grain of salt. And I would take also bullish, news, and even on this channel with a grain of salt, because you just never know. And the thing about Bitcoin is, and the thing about EOS is, it turns on a dime. So maybe one day you're down below $4, but that's not necessarily indicative of the types of progress perhaps we're seeing in the space, the type of adoption appetite we're seeing, not only from individuals, but from institutions. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Most recently, we saw, for example, or heard, I should say, from the great mind Michael Saylor, right? And even though he covers Bitcoin, I thought it was very interesting some of the choice words he had to say about, for example, institutions being able to hold digital assets such as Bitcoin. And one of the great hurdles being the accounting issues with holding Bitcoin as a company, as a publicly listed company, and what comes from that. So the takeaway from that exercise, or the takeaway from the listening of Michael Saylor, for those that don't have time, might be working, is for those that don't know, Bitcoin, when held by a company, based on the current accounting rules, actually they need to account for that when they're reporting their numbers based on the lowest price that Bitcoin registers over that reporting period. And so you can imagine, with Bitcoin being very volatile, you can see swings of Bitcoin being up and down, maybe 30%, right? Maybe even more than that. Maybe a company bought Bitcoin or is looking to buy Bitcoin at 65,000, and now Bitcoin traded down below 40,000. They would actually have to report the value of the Bitcoin they're holding at the lowest value, which might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people here. So you might be saying, well, Phoenix, why is that important? What are you trying to tell us? Well, the gist of it is, if a company holds a significant amount of digital assets such as Bitcoin or EOS based on the current accounting standards, and Bitcoin or EOS dipped by 30, 40%, it would hit their balance sheet pretty significantly if they had an appreciable amount of these assets on their sheets. And so what Michael Saylor is doing is actually looking to, I guess you can call it, appeal the accounting board to change the rules so that it would be more based on the value of these assets marked to market at the time of reporting. And that's a big shift compared to what we have today. Now, MicroStrategy is able to get away with a lot of this stuff, primarily because a guy like Saylor holds a majority stake in the company. And so he has a little bit more wiggle room to do some things that maybe a large company would not do. And also, he's just Chad, right? He doesn't care about maybe necessarily the consequences of an analyst downgrading his company, unlike a lot of other firms such as maybe an Apple or Google or Tesla, where if they held an appreciable amount of digital assets such as Bitcoin, and Bitcoin went down 20 or 30%, analysts would come in and bash the stock, and that would result in the stock actually trading significantly lower. So there are major implications for a modification of the current accounting standards as it relates to adoption. And I think as you see that adoption start to maybe get modified or clarified in some way to go this a la route that Saylor's suggesting, you could see a huge swath of interest, not only in Bitcoin, but other assets, perhaps even the likes of EOS. And so that is a pretty major opportunity, in my opinion. I mean, this is not investment advice, but there is something that is called front running. And front running is when you, as an individual, perhaps have what is characterized as asymmetrical information, which is what we're communicating right now, right? There is asymmetrical information or asymmetrical opportunities, because if you, as an individual, have the ability to hold Bitcoin, and a large institution necessarily doesn't because they're afraid of the consequences of the accounting regulatory environment right now, the rules, you can essentially get in front of that clarification being made. And, at some point, maybe towards the end of the year, maybe the regulatory landscape changes and the accounting rules allow companies to mark these assets to market. And in that case, you're going to see many more billion-dollar plus market cap companies start to buy Bitcoin, but they're going to have to buy it at a much higher price because the likes of the plebs having already bought that. So Those are the kinds of things I'm looking at. It's pretty exciting right now because you do have that asymmetrical type opportunity, and that's not found in. And none of this is investment advice anyway. But Phoenix just I tell it like it is, and that's my opinion. And you guys can let me know what you think about that. But I thought that was pretty valuable information from a guy like Michael Saylor. And the other thing it might do is it might also allow companies to almost in near real time demonstrate revenue or treasury reserves, right? And that's not something we have today because if you think about it, most companies they report on a snapshot basis, but there's no way to know their health over, say, a day-to-day period of time. And so if you can extrapolate this a little bit more, you could see an application, and I don't know if it'll be bullish or maybe something like it, but if companies start to get more innovative in this space and they start to use Bitcoin as a primary treasury reserve assets, well, it does a couple things for them. One, obviously, is the store of value, which we already know that whole narrative. I think we all do that are watching this video. We've talked about a lot. That's why a lot of us hold things like Bitcoin. But also it starts to perhaps generate a yield. And so that's where something like bullish with hashes on EOS might come into play because someone, for example, with $5 billion of Bitcoin assets, Bitcoin holdings, if they're able to use a very secure, transparent application product like bullish and yield 5%, 5% of 5 billion, that's 250 million. That's not bad for just basically lending out a portion of your Bitcoin reserves, right? And so that starts to shift the narrative in terms of maybe what companies want to do, because a lot of them will not be able to continue to race quickly to maybe battle against increased inflation issues. And so it's going to force, I think, more companies to adopt something like that. And again, an application like bullish with hashes to EOS could be part of that framework, with that type of dividend opportunity that you can't really get elsewhere. You can't get it on chain. There's probably more insecure rails in the current space. It's just not something that is mature. And so many companies will be hesitant to probably do that initially. And even the likes of maybe Michael Saylor, I would imagine that in the very beginning would probably only do a very small amount to pilot the type of technology we expect to see. And so for those that are in engineering or, you know anything about products, obviously, whenever you're developing something new, there's always, you always want to pilot something in a smaller scale before you start to roll out or fully embrace something. And so you can imagine that even these larger holders and well-respected companies may only do something like 1% of their holdings, 1 to 5% of their holdings, because they don't want to take a hit should a vulnerability be found. And so maybe you'll see some incentives for these companies and individuals to use this just to actually prove out the kinks. And so my question to you guys is, would you be one of them that actually wants to test this? I mean, I don't know. So that's my little rant on Bitcoin. I think it's still there. Obviously, with EOS, we've seen a lot of movements as of late with I guess you can call it the foundation being laid for funding different projects. And I guess Yves LaRose is heading that up along with Zach Gall and I guess a couple select others within the EOS space. It's going to be interesting to see how this all transpires. I remain a skeptic. I think skepticism is healthy. You need skepticism in communities. Having everybody just be moon boys and overall bullish when, and no pun intended there, when I guess some promises just, EOS just hasn't been there in terms of being a lead in the space, in terms of numbers of people developing and using the network. Now, in other aspects, I would say EOS is far ahead of competition. Like in terms of the crisis in governance, for example, EOS has had to tackle a lot of interesting challenges, in my opinion, that many other chains just haven't even dealt with at this point. And so from that perspective, EOS is significantly more mature in terms of resolving those matters. And also, I think in some ways being open to the fact that perhaps it's not as censorship resistant as maybe other networks, or to different type of decentralization. So you have 21 block producers, and yeah, that is a fact of how EOS as a network functions, but it also functions on the basis of delegated proof of stake. And you have notable companies such as Google Cloud, right, who hasn't even been able to get to the top 21. And so I kind of wonder what will push a company like Google Cloud maybe into the top 21, and what are the implications of that? You have to imagine that a part of Google Cloud strategy is to be ubiquitous within the space. So it's not necessarily just projects like EOS that they're looking to support or be a part of, but I think it's an overall strategy by Google Cloud to be a provider of infrastructure in the space. And so while I think it is interesting to see Google Cloud be a part of the network, I'm more interested to see how the relationship within and their involvement within EOS starts to develop, and what type of participation and support and tool sets they can lend to the community. We have seen a couple tutorials as of late featuring Google Cloud's products and launching EOS networks and playing with wallets on EOS and whatnot. But we haven't really seen, I guess, yet Google produce blocks, for example. It is still very early. I think they just published or edited their JSON. We're still waiting on even small things such as maybe upgrading their logo so that on the block producer networks, on the voting levels, we can see their logo, though they'll be more easily identifiable, for example. Those are just some examples of what we're seeing. So I don't know, what do you guys think about Google Cloud? Are you a supporter of that? Would you vote them in? Are you a skeptic? There's a lot of interesting tool sets that come with Google Cloud, such as AI. But with that also comes some, maybe some cons, and a lot of people are skeptical of or against a company like Google because of some of the practices that they've done in regions and with individuals, and maybe their policies on those things. So, but I think everybody, like companies, just like individuals, come with pros and cons. So you're never going to have a perfect partner. You're never going to have a perfect company, and it's up to individuals to kind of weigh those pros and cons and make a decision if maybe it's worth at the time right now to have a company like that support the network. Certainly, it does bring world-class type awareness of EOS as a network, in my opinion. And I know a lot of the community members all around the world really were founded upon more of this idea of decentralization, self-sovereignty, resiliency, and strength in and more individuality, I would say. But a good percentage of the world still to this day, and especially institutions with significant amounts of capital, think about pensions as well. Look at technologies as those with support from incumbents. Whether we like it or not, that's a big part of the decision-making process in the world today. If you have an analyst who's not necessarily a crypto OG, who's not like one of you guys, who are tuning into this pleb channel. Okay, this channel started many years ago. It's one of the first channels actually to cover EOS. So shout out to all the homies out there who, very early in the days were following me and following what EOS is doing. Back below probably around 50 cents, right? That's a different ethos, right? That's a different spirit than, say, a high net worth financial analyst who doesn't really know much about EOS, okay? Doesn't understand the nuances of even delegated proof of stake versus proof of work, even the nuances within DPoS systems. What type of knowledge do they have in the space? They don't have the knowledge. So what they're looking at is, do they have incumbents they know they've used? And I hate to say it like that, but yeah, it's true. Do they see companies they know of? And that is their sign. That is their way of saying, aha, well, if it's good enough for XYZ company, it must be good enough for me. There must be a future here because the company doesn't invest their capital, right? They're a business that needs to make money. They don't invest their time and money into a network or technology unless it has potentially promising opportunities down the road. Now, that opportunity could be 1 year from today. It could be 5 years from today. We don't really know that. But it's interesting from that perspective that a company would actually elect to invest the time in participating, announce that they're doing it, and for the most part, not really do much of that on other systems. That is very unique to the space, and I think it's underreported, it's under acknowledged, it's not acknowledged as much in the space. So again, that's an example of an asymmetrical type, maybe opportunity, asymmetrical information. What is it about that relationship that maybe the rest of the market isn't seeing right now? And that, the valuation that the network currently is right now, if you compare it to other network, I would say providers, because that's what these are in a sense. You look at Cardano, you look at some other ones, okay? Let's do the breakout, okay? Google has billions of users all across the world. That is a fact. You look at what Cardano recently did this weekend. Now, a lot of people may say, well, why, Phoenix, are you listening to such things as Cardano? But you know why? Because it's important to do a SWOT analysis. It's important to do, even as a holder, whether you're a developer or not. If you're Yves LaRose or Zach Gall, shout out to Zach Gall if you're tuning into this video, and smash the likes and leave a comment below. But if you are going to if you are going to be a leader, or you're going to be a community member, especially one of the influential types, you got to do SWOT analysis on what your competition is. Just like as an engineer, if you're developing a product, it's important to do a trade space, right? What are some of the opportunities you have? What are some of the constraints, requirements of your system? And what distinguishes your product or your community or your offering from other types of solutions on the market? And so EOS as a provider is really no different than that. And to date, I mean, while there is high performance on the network, there's obviously demonstration of very unique permission systems that on EOS that you really can't find much other place. A lot of that, I would say, features or potential is still raw in nature. And some people may not like that comment, but let me clarify a little bit. EOS, for example, the permissions. Let's just take the permissions. How many people here use EOS permissions at the level that they can be used? Meaning multi-sig on very valuable holdings within a wallet. And what I mean by multi-sig, for those that maybe aren't aware, is you have one wallet, right, that's holding and it's physically holding your tokens, but you get what I'm saying. You have a key, you have a public and private key that's associated with holdings of said tokens on EOS. Okay, you may have a significant amount of those tokens. You may have 6 figures or 7 figures or 8 figures worth of those tokens. You may want to provide that value to your relatives, maybe, as a way to preserve your wealth should something happen, in 2 different respects. One is obviously theft of a wallet. Now, even though that's not likely to happen, it does happen. Damage to a wallet can happen, right? Those are all possibilities across all the different types of crypto technologies. Okay, but how many people actually use the inherent permission system with EOS, which does allow, for example, 2 keys to be used, 3 keys to be used, 4 keys to be used? Make a 3 of 5 type key structure where you can actually recall your tokens. You can actually gain, I guess you could call it almost like an admin or super user type power over the holdings of your tokens. And so in that way, it makes it, even though you are self-custody, makes it very highly resilient to outright theft on a local level, at least. Still, with EOS, I guess someone could argue, and we have to acknowledge these things, that with 21 BPs, maybe there's a chance that through the regulatory structure, what are the chances of 15 of the 21 being appealed to freeze or lock out certain tokens of a user? Now, we haven't actually seen that per se explicitly, but we did recently see a theft of or an exploitation of a contract on EOS in which I believe the tokens were stolen back by the block producers. And so that's something to really consider, I think, when you're looking at these types of assets. And that's what, at least for now, makes something like BTC very different than something as fluid as EOS. And so the way I see EOS, maybe to sum this up, is, again, raw features such as this multi-sig. But I think where it would be nice, and this is really a video for Yves and Zach and those with the, I guess, more influence on the network, because it doesn't come from plebs like Phoenix. And, I've acknowledged at this point. But I think what you're going to get in terms of more adoption on a network like EOS is when the tool sets and features become more abstracted. And that's something we still haven't seen. If you look at, and what I mean by that is the multi-sig support that we just discussed, the permissions, if those in some way were ported onto an application that people could use to easily self-custody their tokens and also create in an easy, seamless way, couple clicks, multi-sig that is secure, that is, obviously safe to use and is solid, that is a distinguishing factor over something like Ethereum. Like Ethereum doesn't really have that native and abstract out of the box. It just doesn't exist. So those are the types of things I think just from a feature standpoint. I'm not even talking about applications. I'm just saying, what can you offer somebody that these other assets can't have? Well, okay, I can do multi-sig out of the box using this type of open source code. And hey, we also have these maybe trusted areas where you can go and interact with that, with the network to enable that, right? So an example that is kind of, how would you enable that? Well, maybe the most natural way would be to create a feature like that through a wallet, right? So instead of making a new website that people go to, maybe something like EOS Authority, right? If it had a way to natively and it marketed it in a way that says multi-sig, better, more securance of your account, 3 of 5, right? There are other websites, by the way, or other platforms such as Bitcoin that actually charge for the service, right? So Casa is a good example of that, where they charge for this service. If you're a high net worth individual and you want to secure your assets in some way, you can use Casa. So for $100, you get the service. Well, maybe that's native within EOS in some ways through the wallet process. And maybe there is still some kind of fees, but maybe you can abstract that through the inflation that users get. So you can actually start to build these additional things within the wallet that are beneficial that you can't find really anywhere else. That's just one example. The second thing is, obviously, we don't really have too many usable applications at this point. I think a lot of that is still with the regulations, the regulatory hurdle. If you're going to start to deploy tokens, you got Gary Gensler, who's on everybody's butt right now and just making it, I think, very difficult, and others like Gary, who are making it very difficult for innovators in the space to feel even comfortable wanting to create anything of substance, anything that a mainstream investor would want to spend time to learn. And so until a lot of that gets cleared up, it really causes significant hurdles for even investors or someone who's ballsy in the space to say, yeah, I'll send you, I'd want to pitch $100,000 or $200,000 into a project to launch it off the ground, because the fact of the matter is it's not an environment that is conducive to allow organic trials of this new technology. Many years ago, we talked about even having, for example, Uber on EOS. how can you do that? How can you really have an Uber on EOS, which arguably would have some type of ownership system with riders and drivers and the blurred lines of roles? How can you have that type of a system if a guy like Gary Gensler is going to come and say, well, this is actually seen as a security, so we're going to not only shut you down, but we're going to fine you, and you could go to jail if you don't follow all of our additional questions that we have for you. It just makes it a very miserable experience. And from the perspective of an engineer or someone who has time to learn, it's like, why would I even invest time to innovate or try stuff? I might as well just stick to my own engineering, right? At least I'm going to make 6 figures or very good, decent money, I know that space. Why am I going to go in this other murky area that they make so cloudy and so sketchy? You don't even feel like innovating. And I think a lot of the space is like that now. A lot of the innovators in the space, they just ain't having it. And so then you have the same perception in the markets. So you have the mainstream of CNBC and Bloomberg and all these, publications, and they're looking at anything, even something like Bitcoin, as very risky. Don't invest in Bitcoin. Don't invest in something like EOS. It's an altcoin. This is on the borderline of being safe. And so that is what you're seeing. And so I think that's the catalyst for something like bullish. In a way, bullish could potentially. And I say potentially, but it could potentially be that type of a demonstration of something that actually works out of the box as an app, as somewhat a centralized app, but it still has value. Why? Because you can see the liquidity registered on chain in some ways. Now, I don't know the exact mechanics of how the hashes on EOS. So to back up a little bit, the way bullish is supposed to work, and I don't know how many of you guys have actually tried it in terms of the pilot phase, which they had a couple weeks ago, but they did have a pilot phase, bullish, that is owned by Block One in partnership with FPAC. They kind of merged to form this company, and Block One and FPAC did to form bullish. And basically, bullish is supposed to, I guess from my understanding now, bullish is supposed to have their own version of EOS.io as a blockchain, as a private chain. And they would be conducting these types of operations on their local chain. Now, we don't know the architecture of all that, but they would send hashes to the EOS main public network as proof of not tampering with basically not tampering with the integrity of the trades, the holdings they have, etc. That can be subsequently audited at a later date. Now, what we don't know is how open the EOS.io chain would be for not only auditors, but for individuals, right, to prove the integrity of the data and the trades. I think that is a very key feature. That's going to be a very key step for this technology, because if you're able to have a model for relating, a private chain to a public chain in terms of transactions and prove data integrity in some way, for an exchange that has high amounts of throughput in terms of number of transactions and actions on the network, you could apply that same model to virtually any other thing in the space. The applications themselves would have private EOS.io chains, but then they would have this link to this main intelligent chain. And so it would form a truth machine in a sense, not so much a store of value, but really a store of truth, a store of facts. And so there is value to that. There is tremendous value. But again, there needs to be kind of a model and a framework to initially demonstrate that process. Very much the way Bitcoin, initially was thought of maybe digital money, right? It started out as a way to instantly and cheaply send money. And some people might argue that the Lightning Network does that, which is the second layer on Bitcoin. But from the perspective of Bitcoin itself as a raw, pristine asset, the current thesis right now is that Bitcoin is a store of value. So over the years, the narrative with Bitcoin has evolved to arrive at the utility it has right now, which is performing that type of storage of value. Now, fast forward to something like EOS or those that are like it. I think what's up for grabs is really the storage of truth, and what chain provides those features or provides those opportunities where apps are going to be built. So I think that's where things are going. Still very speculative. Definitely not a moon boy in EOS, but some of the things look pretty promising, at least in that regard. Bullish is really a good pilot for that because unfortunately we didn't really see it with Voice.com. Voice.com used a private EOS IO initialization. They didn't really rely on the public chain for hashes, is my understanding, nor do I think the Voice.com website was really auditable in any way to look at their private EOS IO chain and try to relate that to a hash on the public chain. So we haven't really seen a model like this, a framework where it's what you would characterize as a hybridized blockchain system, where you have elements of a centralized blockchain and related to hashes on a public chain. And what is the value of that, guys? I mean, if it is done in a way. It's very hard to say because, again, we don't know the mechanics. And arguably, if you have sub-second type transactions or actions on a private chain, I'm not necessarily certain myself that you can prove tamper-proof resistance on the public chain through a hash that's maybe done every second, right? Because in between those transactions, you could have a lot of things going on. So, those are the types of discussions I personally, for those that are more technically inclined out there that are SMEs and EOS, maybe Eve LaRose, maybe you can get one of your associates or colleagues to comment on that. But those are the kinds of things I think as a community, those are the types of things we need to be able to answer, because right now I don't really get a sense of what value even hashing would provide. If, for example, someone could argue that on a sub-second basis, you're still able to manipulate and tamper data. That's kind of where I'm still a little not clear on what evidence there would be to demonstrate this value. I suppose, and I don't know if this is even possible, but I don't know what type of optimized EOSIO chain on the private network, that enables still sub-second transactions, but somehow the hash proves the integrity in some way in the actions, if that would be a way to get around it. I have no way of knowing. It's just, this is wild, this is different, this is new, and you got to imagine there that that's just something to really consider. And so I'd like to know what you guys are doing. Are you involved in the EOS IO, tutorials that they've run? I know they've extended that to, I think, next year, which is nice. Block One has extended the tutorials for that. I've tried to do most of them, and I've gotten through a lot of them, but I just don't see the developer momentum at this point. I don't see a lot of initiatives for hackathons or maybe even a year-long Google type challenge, which would be cool to see on EOS. We've talked about that before on this channel. So there's not really an incentive right now, at least, to build or use EOS IO because we don't have the user base and there aren't the incentives that a typical new technology would have for someone to learn the code base and develop on it. I mean, if you're an engineer, I guess if you're a programmer, maybe if you're getting funding, I guess, there's a reason for you to do it. But if you're an engineer and you can get paid elsewhere and make decent money, I guess my question would be, why would you work with that technology? And so that's something, again, as a community, got to be able to answer. So with that said, guys, it's an interesting time, to say the least, in the space. We're seeing Gary Gensler definitely stir the pot, so to speak. in terms of all these projects and maybe trying to grapple with money, getting money from them. We're seeing the central banks in the United States continue to print money at an unprecedented pace. Most recently, right now, this week, guys, they're going through, the United States government is going through, along with the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, going through a process to do a song and dance about raising the debt ceiling. And so this, in a way, is just clown speak. Don't pay attention to it, in my opinion, guys, because what you're seeing right now in terms of the decline in risk-on assets like Bitcoin and EOS is really this posturing in the market to think that maybe they won't raise the debt ceiling. Maybe they're going to start raising rates because they view things as inflationary and they're concerned. But I mean, how many times have we gone through this the past couple years? I mean, this is the same circle jerk we've seen for the longest time now, and it's not going to end. They're probably just going to do the song and dance because it's out of tradition, right? They have to pretend like there's a fight. And then ultimately, near the deadline or thereafter, shortly, they'll raise the debt ceiling, and then you'll have more money printing and risk on assets will go back up. So this is just, I think, part of the show. I don't think anything has really changed. It doesn't matter who's in power. So it's important to be aware of those things because I think a lot of people are getting afraid because of the China ban and because of this hawkish maybe stance in some ways by those in power. When ultimately we've seen in the past how many times China has banned BTC. Big deal. So what? Oh, the Federal Reserve and the government are talking about a debt ceiling, maybe halting everything. They never actually do it because if they did, everything would just totally go to shit. So it's not possible for them to do it. They actually have to continue to print the money. But part of the narrative is to, give the posture to very influential stakeholders and other participants around the world that the United States still cares about debt levels, right? Because debt levels at a certain percentage do cause massive runs on the money. People start to lose respect and trust in the value of a currency. And when that happens, you have significant runs on the money. And people flock to other assets, such as hard assets, things they can actually buy, food, land, shelter, gold, right? And away from those assets. And so that may be what you're seeing. You're seeing more of a posture, a hawkish posture to try to manage those types of negative impacts to the United States dollar. But this is not much different than what we've seen. Another thing I've noticed, and I want to know what's happening in your neck of the world, is basically we've seen a lot of interest and buying of real estate in all parts. I've actually traveled now because I took some time off from work. We finally finished the systems I was building. It was a pretty hectic time because it took a little over a year to finish, and I actually got the vid, if you know what I mean. So your boy Phoenix was down for a while. I had some chills and some other ailments, but I was able to battle through that okay. And your boy's back strong. Definitely doing my runs and just staying fit, as I always talk to you guys about in all these years. So be on the lookout for that. But what I've noticed in my travels recently in my time off is just it's just a buy up of all assets. So whether it's housing, and I'm mostly on the West Coast here. I don't know where you guys are, but on the West Coast here, it just seems like everything is incredibly expensive. Everything is overinflated, and it's not even related to the fundamentals anymore. But what's different now than in the past is these assets I'm seeing, the competition, if you will, for a lot of us millennials or people older, maybe you're Gen X or maybe you're Gen Z, shout out to you guys. But what we're seeing is these institutions actually buying these assets, all cash, way over asking, 10 or 15% over asking. So you come in with a cash offer, you're thinking you're a strong suit. These guys come in with 10 or 20% over what you're even offering. And so, and they maintain an entire portfolio in different towns and cities is what I've seen, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. And there's a lot of these institutions. It's not just one or two. We're also seeing pension systems get in there because they're chasing after this yield, and they're buying these assets, putting on some paint, and then renting them out and charging up the ass to people who are just trying to have a roof over their head. And so that seems to be the new model, rapidly evolving here, especially on the West Coast. And in some of these larger cities I visited, some of them used to be my hometown. Venice is one of them, where it used to be a really neat, nice beach town. And I mean, yeah, there was always some homeless there, but I think as of late, it's just inundated. I mean, it's just everywhere. It's just like it is insane, the amount of homeless and the locations for the homeless and the RVs that are parked everywhere. And it's just like a third world apocalyptic. I mean, it's really sad. And you didn't see this, maybe even 5 years ago, you didn't even see it. I mean, it was to some levels, yes, but not the way it is now. This is insane. And so it's really causing, I think, what this Klaus Schwab, or whatever this guy's name is from the World Economic Forum, this thesis he had of basically millennials or others not being able to own anything and being okay with it. And so this model is actually being caused, in my opinion, because there's now this money printing, which they're giving to institutions at 0%. So they're able to get a loan for nothing. And they're able to go out there and buy assets that, normally a working man or a working woman or a working family will go out and buy for a reasonable price. When you get to a level where you're making six figures, you're making pretty good money, you're respecting your community, you can't afford something, that's a bad sign. But it's also more concerning that the folks that are acquiring these assets are doing so with all cash, which is different than in the past, because in the past we had booms in real estate and they were driven by levels of easy money. So if you look at back in the 2007, 2006 period, that was driven on fully easy money. And those people were taking out leveraged loans, HELOCs mostly, that reset. And when the interest rates reset, that caused the monthly payment they were having to make on the properties to explode to a level they couldn't afford. So the whole thing collapsed. It's very different now because, like I said, these institutions actually are flush with cash. They have infinite amounts of money. They're just buying shit that they can. Whatever they can buy, they're buying it. And so I think a lot of that has to do with the fact of yield chasing, but also what we're seeing is just inflation, outright inflation. And if you think about it, there's only a couple places to go traditionally when you see inflation. You can buy gold, right? You don't want to really hold cash. You can buy stocks. Stocks are significantly overinflated for the price to earnings ratios we're seeing. I mean, they're incredibly insane. And you can buy rare real estate in maybe unique areas, right? Where historically they just won't build more types of those assets. And so a lot of these firms I've researched, because I do, and you can do the same thing. You can go on your local government website and see who these buyers are. A lot of them are large firms that are using these almost as holdings, as like asset holdings. And their job is to actually return value for the pension systems that throw money at them, or some other schemes they have. And so it's just interesting. So I think right now it's an interesting time in real estate. It seems like firms like even Zillow and others who have all the analytics and in some cases are actually owning these homes do have direct control in the market, because as a percentage of the assets they hold and they're renting out and they pay all cash for these, they can make the market actually continue to go up because they hold and they keep buying all these things and they're limiting the supply for average plebs, or they could just dump everything and crash the market. But it will be on at their control, which is not something that we've seen in the past. So just a couple comments here on the chat. Blockcrafter, shout out to you for tuning in. Blockcrafter says, it's really hard for me to want to stay in the EOS community. And I do feel that. I mean, I know block crafters, you've been around for a while now. I've actually followed some of your work and appreciate what you're doing. And I know it's hard to stay in the community, but you also have to keep in mind, and something else I didn't really mention here. And I mean, I understand where you're coming from, okay? But I guess what I would say is part of the delays or inaction with a lot of things in EOS, I think, and I don't know, I can't be convinced. I can be convinced otherwise, but I think a lot of it, actually, looking at the recent comments from Gary Gensler, you can see clearly that they're on a hunt to look at projects that have centralized control and influence, and they're going to come after them, and they're going to find them, they're going to try to shut them down. And so what you saw by Block One maybe wasn't the most popular type of approach in terms of their limited interaction with the community. But in a sense, I can appreciate the cautiousness from the regulatory framework, because you see a lot of these other projects, and there's certainly some questions about, just how much involvement a big company that basically created the code for a network, how much involvement they should have, as the network starts to mature and decentralize. And so this absolute test for decentralization is going to be something to continue to monitor. A lot of even notable people in this space have talked about a clock that starts and stops when major changes happen on a network or major influence on a network. So if you can imagine, you wouldn't want to have a company that's so influential on a network do everything, because if other institutions come in with billions of dollars, the last thing they want is their value at risk because the founding company is in competition with them, or is against them, or maybe doesn't want to work with them, or maybe has some conflict of interest, right? That could be a very negative thing to have on a network. And so I'm certain that there is some level, some development in play here of screening public networks for perception of centralization. And I think B1 is dancing a very fine line with trying to minimize the chances of that occurring for a project like EOS. And so I know it's really hard to understand that, especially over the course of over 3 years now, 4 years. It's hard to digest, but we'll have to see how the community evolves, what happens with these grants, with the EOS Foundation. I don't put all my eggs in EOS. I don't recommend you do, so hopefully you didn't. I would say on a conservative basis, diversify your assets, real estate, gold, Bitcoin, cash even, is very valuable to have when you're looking to maintain risk. But with that said, we talked about today, for example, the involvement from a provider like Google Cloud, and there must be something that a company like that sees to invest revenue, basically their money, into a project like a public network like EOS. And so that's some of the things I would tell you. But I do understand your involvement, your limitation interest in EOS, or your declining interest. And I'm not going to lie, I felt the same way, especially with when we saw the Everything EOS channel start to decline in terms of its participation, and even the OG like Zach Gall, just over time stopped doing his videos. And so it made it difficult to want to continue to do them, I guess, in some regular format. And another thing is there just wasn't a lot to talk about. And, it's difficult to have any videos if there isn't new things to discuss. And so I would like to see more involvement within the EOS community on the focus, on what the focus is. Currently right now, for example, it just seems like there's a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of things spread thin, but there isn't like one overall um, main thing with like main focus and target and objective and dates and milestones. I don't really see that. So, coming from a traditional standpoint, as many of you guys know, I'm a homie engineer. I mean, I am an engineer, but I look at my projects more from a traditional standpoint, right? I mean, a project has a scope of work, it has a budget, it has major milestones, it has project updates, right? If I'm running a project as a PM, very different, obviously, when I'm doing that role than I am here online. But when I'm running those things, it's a different world. I'm fully accountable to the stakeholders, and once a week or once every 2 weeks, even for a project that takes 2 weeks, 2 years, I should say. We do stakeholder talks, right? We do a stakeholder update. Stakeholder update, it's not a long thing. It's, a small, maybe a 10-minute conversation, what things are working, where I'm at in the project, major milestones hit, where my budget is at, right? There's a framework for discussing the evolution of the project over its cradle to grave inception. So when you start a project, developing requirements, all the way to when you get to, maybe deployment, maybe testing. And, obviously nothing is perfect. You start out with the schedule, you start out with the budget, you have objectives, you have your team, maybe teammates change, maybe you run into major challenges during the project period, you run into different shortfalls. You may even run into budget issues, but the main thing is to keep the community engaged. And that's not something that seems to be EOS's strong suit. So I would hope that the leaders within the community would take note to that and start to make outreach and communication a priority, because you're not really doing anybody a favor if you're just working in the background. It might be easier to do that, but I mean, this is it's supposed to be a community. It's supposed to be communications occurring in some way, and having that engagement, even on a weekly or biweekly basis, I think would say a lot to increasing the confidence in a network like EOS. I think the Eden, calls are okay, whatever. The inductions, I don't have any beef with that, but I think a better use of time would be on specific project initiatives. Eden inductions are nice, but unless you're doing the kinds of things that we talked about today, I don't know if you're going to make a meaningful penetration in the market in terms of convincing folks that things are actually changing on this network, right? So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? What are some of the things you'd like to see? That's the kind of engagement I like to have here. We do have another comment. Jason Jaffe says that, have I looked into the EOS Bees project? I've heard about the Bees project. I'm somewhat skeptical on, I guess, the structure of that project, personally. I know there's like a higher minion person at the top, and there's like a queen bee, and then there's distribution of these tokens. I tend to not want to have that type of a framework. I actually prefer a more direct reward, system, maybe through the foundation itself or through Palmetto, where the person actually doing the work can go and seek funding. And on a regular basis, maybe they're given some small amount of revenue for their work that's demonstrated over a period of time and is consistent. I'd much rather prefer that than this queen bee system, which I think over time may be susceptible to just more bureaucracy, more red tape, and just more BS. But I mean, I wish the project much success, and I'll be viewing that from afar, I guess, and we'll see how it goes. I just think with more tokens sometimes, I know there's been a lot of projects and like the Finny token and all these things, and I just don't think that, I think while it's cute, I just think there's more core elements to EOS as a community that the energy could be spent in, and that's what all this is about. I mean, whether it's Bitcoin, other crypto assets, it's really about, I guess, consensus and energy control. You're trying to channel your energy into a network that actually has and maintains integrity, makes it better to develop more resilient, transparent truth systems. And I just find a lot of the projects with their own tokens and their own little pyramid schemes, it's not something I personally am. I'm just really interested in doing. So, I think KISS is a good philosophy when you're dealing with, at least initially, KISS is a good, keeping it simple is a good strategy, and having demonstration of value being created and directly rewarding the people who do it, not the administrators who I haven't really seen on YouTube do anything. So, with all due respect, I mean, when I start to see the type of engagement, maybe the development of some of these tools, maybe then things will change. But I haven't really seen a lot, especially in EOS, people show up. There's a couple guys, obviously the guy from EOS Nation is I think probably at this point one of the more consistent personalities on EOS that still is making videos. And beyond him, we have the Nova Crypto guy. We have Felix Staffelbaker. Shout out to Felix Staffelbaker for tuning in. If you are at some point, leave a comment in the comments below. We have Felix, the other Felix. I believe he makes some really interesting videos. And I have to get his name and mention that on the next video I do. But he went around actually when he was doing his road trip and introduced people to EOS, and I think that content's really unique, something of those natures. But I just think that some of it, where we need to go as a community, is just still not quite there. So I don't know what's going to change that, but I'm willing to discuss it here with others, and it'd be nice to have just a forum outside of EOS Eden. That enables just regular users to do pleb talks. That's something I would enjoy. It's fun to get on here and talk with you guys in a chat fashion, but it'd be even more fun to do a pleb talk with Felix Staffelbaker, maybe the other Felix, maybe Zach Gall, and have something on a regular basis to, discuss these musings, right? And even beyond Dan Larimer, who's kind of fallen behind in the shadows. You don't hear a lot from Dan at this point. So kind of curious about that. I've heard some stuff also about the POS token. I know there's some talks now that maybe a new privacy token on EOS will get distributed based on this future snapshot of holders of PEOS. I don't know much more beyond that. So if you guys have information on that, I'd love to share it or discuss that with you. Be interesting to hear a little bit more about the founders of that token and how they intend to use it as a, how is that a benefit for users on EOS and ZK Snarks. So a lot of there's some things happening, but just seems like we're maybe waking up out of our hibernation of some kind. So. I mean, what do you guys think? We've obviously seen a lot of personalities also leave the space entirely. Some of those being EOS OGs, right? And so I think a lot of them they ran out of runway. And what I mean by runway is, obviously as someone in the crypto space, if you're doing this full time and you have expenses and maybe even have a family, it can be pretty taxing to just follow projects and do videos, for an extended period of time, because you need revenue to purchase things, right? You need food, you need rent, you need your rent money, you need your utilities paid, and so it's not really a sustainable model, which is the other issue with not having businesses on EOS that actually create their own organic revenue. which goes back to the regulatory space. So, I think that should be the main priority right now is what types of projects could are possible, right, without having the regulators come in and try to shut things down or try to arrest people. What are the kinds of things right now that people would pay for to have as a service? I think one of those is just, like I said, this multi-sig type feature on a wallet. That's something I would probably want as a service. It would be interesting to see if there's support to do that from the likes of the Anchor wallet, for example, or others like it, maybe EOS Authority. Could there be a neat interface to make multi-sig, to make a dead man switch? Very unique features that you could test out, maybe even port the code on your own, and then easily use, right? I don't know. So you guys let me know in the comments below, what are some of the features you'd like to see that are relatively objectable. So you have to, be very clear on what feature would be, and maybe even how much you would pay for it. And I'd be very interested to hear about that, because I think those are some of the things that maybe a lot of these developers, want to hear about. Everything to this point, for the most part, in terms of tool sets, has been free, but at some point I think we need to go from a free model to maybe more of a freemium model, and that's just something to consider. So in any event, guys, this is Phoenix. It's Tuesday, actually reaching towards the end of September here, the 28th, after 1 o'clock on the West Coast. So hope you guys are having a phenomenal day, and until next time, peace.